thanks to the Sheriff's Office for sending the Division Chief in charge of detentions here to talk to you about the Sheriff's Alternative Sentencing Program. Rob Reardon is here, and you've been with the Sheriff's Office now for
2.5 years.
Came to us from Louisiana.
And Minnesota.
And Minnesota. So Rob has the position of basically being in charge of the entire jail and the operations. And he and Dan Ayton, which he'll tell you more about, are in charge of running this program for the sheriff. And he can give you the backdrop on why this became necessary, how we kind of got to this place, and what this means for you and your cases. So thank you for coming, Rob.
Thanks you for actually having me, and thanks Pete for having me. So yeah, like you said, my name is Rob Reardon, and I'm going to talk about our reduction. You guys have had one too, unfortunately. I'm going to talk about this, the alternative sentencing program, and then answer any questions that you potentially have. So as a function of the reduction for the county, the Sheriff's Office has had to cut our budget by $5.4 million approximately. Well, as the Sheriff eloquently says, we don't have $5.4 million worth of paper clips. Ultimately for us, it's a function of cutting staff because that's our largest resource. And so instead of actually cutting staff, what we did is through attrition, we just didn't hire people, okay? So we didn't do any layoffs, we didn't do anything like that, but ultimately we had to reduce the overall number of our staff by approximately 50 or so employees. And so we started that process in early of 2019, and we're actually right now at about 60 staff below what the number was that we originally started with. And so effectively, we had to, as a function of that process, evaluate our risk to public safety, and it was determined, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, to reduce the number of inmates inside the jail. So we looked at our jail capacity, and we decided to shut down an entire floor. So on December 31st of 2019, we shut down the 7th floor of the old jail. That's 288 beds, 244 inmates. And we've been operating off that since December 31st of 2019. So we have a couple of avenues for actually managing that population. One is, and this is not something that we want to do, but there's a judge's order. If people haven't seen it, I have a copy of that too. It's a judge's order that allows us to release inmates that have actually have made 50% of their sentence. Okay, so we go through a calculation every morning at 8 o'clock and determine what our number is, and essentially if it's 1,148 or more, we have to employ that directive and start evaluating the individuals within our facility for release from 90% on down to 50%. Now, fortunately enough for us, we have not had to actually release anybody. Because again, it's not our desire. I don't want to release people. The people that are sentenced, I want them to serve their time, because not only have you guys done a great job in doing the job that you do, but there should be some level of punishment for the individual, and that's the sentence, right? So some of the other things that we've done over the course of this last year is we started taking credit cards for bail, and that's actually sped up the process pretty dramatically in our intake area. We've also increased the number of free phone calls that the inmates get, and that's actually allowed the inmates to actually get out more because they have more free opportunities to make phone calls. So one of the other things that we've developed is the alternative sentencing program. And this is to manage the inmate population. And so we had Judge, not Pilkington, McNulty. Wow, it's not even that long. Judge McNulty, at the end of his term as a chief judge, signed an order that structures what's called alternative sentencing program. And for us, alternative sentencing program encompasses work release and electronic home detention. Okay? So what we're starting is a program where inmates will be sentenced to alternative sentencing program, because technically we really don't have work release anymore. We have alternative sentencing program. They'll go into work release. Once they get to 50% of their time, they'll have the opportunity, at our discretion, to potentially go back in the community on electronic home detention. The sheriff's office is going to manage this program. We're not pushing this out to a provider. Okay. So the other questions that have been asked previously is who's going to be eligible for placement into the program? Well, any inmate that has a VRA is not going to be eligible. Okay, no inmate that has a VRA is going to be eligible for electronic home detention. Okay, they have to have a verifiable address, and for us that means 2 bills that we can actually document. They actually have to have a house. They have to be in a job. We want them to be in a job for a while before they actually become eligible for electronic home detention. So just because they may be eligible at 50% doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to walk out the door on a bracelet that day. What we want to do is we want to establish a good track record for their work, for their employment, a good track record for their behavior, and if any of those things aren't in alignment, then they're not going to go to electronic home detention. The home location has to actually be within 20 miles of the jail. And that's ultimately a staffing issue for me, because one of the components of this program is that I'm going to have staff that are actually going to go do home site visits and go do work site visits. Okay? So this isn't a program where we're just going to let them out and they're just going to be not seen for forever. Okay? Anybody have any questions about the specifics of that? Yes, ma'am.
I think it may be confusing to some here what you mean by 50% of the work release sentence. And by that I mean, traditionally, a year work release, if you did what you're supposed to do, you were out in 6 months. At least that's all the way we kind of envision that. But so it's 50% of that 6 months, right?
Yes. And technically, so I drew up a couple of different pieces of paper, or pulled up a couple of different pieces of paper. On this third sheet of paper, nice little bubble format, so I like circles. The inmates in work release don't technically get 50%. They get 0.433 good time days. So they don't do straight 1 for 1. Okay? So in this scenario, just to make it clear so everybody has an understanding, if they're sentenced to 180 days, 6 months, okay? If they do straight jail time, they get 12 days statutory time, 1 for 15. Okay? That's assuming that they're not involved in the behavioral health unit, that they're not involved as being an inmate worker. Okay? Because it's not, some inmates don't meet those criteria, and they may not be eligible to be an inmate worker, they may not be eligible to be in the behavioral health unit. Okay? So if they're involved in the behavioral health unit or an education program, they get 0.33 days for every day that they serve. Okay? So and then finally for work release, it would be they get 0.433 days. So it's not quite the 50% that everybody believes it is. Okay? And so at the time that they, based off of our calculations, would be eligible at that 50% of the sentence that they're going to actually serve, they would be potentially eligible for electronic home detention if they met our additional requirements. that make sense?
So their sentence would actually run till April 5th,
Yes.
if they're eligible, if they don't violate, if they do everything right, they're on home detention from February 18th to April 5th, and they're done April 5th.
Yes, and so they will continue to serve their entire sentence, just like they would in work release, but they'll do it at their home location. And so, as Eva's talked about, this for us is an avenue to be able to better regulate our population, because we don't want to release inmates that are serving a sentence back into the public at that 50% ratio.
So I see that you have to have a minimum of a 60-day sentence to participate. What options are available to people whose sentence is less than 60 days in jail?
They will just be placed in work release. And again, that goes back to, we want to establish a good track of behavior. We want to establish a good track of where they're working and have an understanding of their employer, so that we're, not creating public safety concerns. Yes, ma'am.
So I guess just to confirm, so what we'll be hearing in court from the judge is either a straight jail sentence or an alternate sentence, essentially. We're not gonna hear judges say work release.
You should not.
Okay.
You should not hear a work release anymore. Yes, sir, in the back.
When you said this, when you hit a certain number of inmates in the jail, you need to end up utilizing this program?
No, this program has gone into effect as of January 1st.
So, I'm sorry.
So the other one that I was talking about is that we have a judge's order from, actually from Judge Nieto.
Nieto.
Wow.
Judge Nieto, who was, I think that goes back to 99 or 98, something, a long time ago, where we have the authority based off that order to release people just to the street. And again, that's not something that we're advocating for. It's a function of we have to manage our inmate population to make it safe for not only the inmates, but the staff that I manage every day.
So when that day comes, do you release everybody that fits certain criteria, or do you get to pick and choose?
There is some discretion in that authority for us to actually release individuals.
I'm saying if you're one bed over, does that mean you're releasing one person?
If we were one bed over, we would release one person.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Yes, sir.
How does pre-sentence confinement credit affect these times?
Well, we're gonna still, if the reduction results in less than 2 months served, they're just gonna go to work release, if that makes sense.
What, in the example of a 180-day sentence, let's say they have 60 days, then, technically at that point, they could be moved to EHD.
No, again, we want to establish a good track record of behavior, and we want to establish a good record of where they're working. With our electronic home detention program, the question was asked, is it a passive system or is it an active system? It's kind of a middle-of-the-road system, quite honestly. I have staff, they're going to be monitoring the system, but we're not going to be sitting there watching people move on a map, okay? The system has the capacity to send us alerts, and so we will set up time frames where they have to be at their house. And if they are not at their house, that will send us alert. And as we are law enforcement, we have people that we can deploy to go to the house and find out where they're at. Same thing with their work. And so that's why it's important for us to establish a understanding of their work hours. Okay? The other thing that has been asked is the system that we are currently employing not only has a bracelet with a GPS, it also has a PVT on it. And so from 1 to as many times as we want, not to make it ridiculous, but we can have them blow into the PVT. It shows their face as they blow into it, and then that sends a recording of that with the outcome on the instrument to us. And so every person, every day will receive at least one of those. At least one.
And what happens if that's violation?
Well, if somebody, good question, Pete. If somebody violates, they're coming back into the jail. We don't have to bring them back in front of the judiciary and continue to clog up that process. That's just going to be handled through our disciplinary process. Individuals like that will just come back into the jail, and they'll end up serving the rest of their sentence in jail. Because we want to make it a disincentive for them, obviously.
So if you get a jail sentence from the court, they are not eligible for the alternative sentencing program.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Say again. If they get a straight jail sentence, yes, they would not be.
So there's three options for the court. Just alternative sentencing, jail, and alternative sentencing, or just jail.
It's just jail and alternative sentencing. One or the other.
So the court could not impose 2 weeks of jail plus 30 days of alternative sentencing on top of that.
Well, I suppose they could get into that structure if they wanted to, but, I mean, again, yeah, I mean, I'm sure they could do a straight jail sentence and then do alternative sentencing. That hasn't been asked before,
And just so we're clear, with respect to the early release protocols, my understanding is that VRA crimes are not eligible for the early release.
Yes,
They're out of that whole matrix.
yes. Yes, sir.
Is there a notification system for victims on the non-VRA crimes, like your trespassing, your low-level burglary, stuff like that?
No, not for either one of these release mechanisms.
Vine doesn't really, or?
Vine doesn't do that, it's only for VRA instances.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So someone pleads guilty to a class 1 misdemeanor, 3rd degree assault, not domestic violence. Is the only option then 2 years of straight jail? Because it wouldn't qualify for the alternative sentence?
Yeah, well, they would be eligible under the statute for work release.
So there is still work release for that?
Yeah, they would still go to alternative sentencing program, but they wouldn't be allowed to go out on a bracelet.
Okay, so then it essentially is a work release?
Yes.
Would it be the same if you had like a 2-year work release sentence as a condition of probation on felony?
Same thing, but again, what the judges are gonna sentence is just alternative sentencing.
Okay. But then they wouldn't necessarily qualify for the ankle monitor release?
Yes.
And if that person is homeless, they're not gonna qualify?
Yeah, because we have no place to send them to.
Okay.
So, and we are working collaboratively, we work collaboratively with the probation department already on a lot of those individuals that are in the jail on alternative sentencing program.
Just to confirm, you mentioned that they have to, excuse me, actually be working? Does looking for a job qualify, or?
Not on electronic home detention.
Okay.
If they haven't, and for us, just so everybody's aware, so I structured things a little differently because when I first started, we had over 100 walk-offs from work release, which is horrible. Okay, it is horrible. And a lot of the inmates never got a job the entire time that they're in work release. They were just going out and job seeking. I totally disagree with that. And so if they don't get a job within 10 days, they're kicked out of work release. In this environment, in this economic environment right here, if you can't get a job in 10 days, it means you don't want, yeah. And so even if it's day, and so they get a job within 10 days, otherwise they go to both side jail. And then they could potentially become eligible as an inmate worker, but at that point, I'm not having to worry about them being out on the street. And so we've been able to cut, and this is still a horrible number, but we had well over 100 walk-offs This last year, 2019, we had just under 50. It's still horrible. I'm not exactly excited about that, but it's way better than what it used to be.
It's my understanding in work release that they pay a portion of their, what they make to stay there.
Yeah, and so in electronic home detention, they will pay for the same amount,
Okay.
okay? And so there's no disparity. So the amount that she's talking about is 2 times their hourly rate, or at least a minimum of minimum wage. And that'll be the exact same when they go out on electronic home detention. And that's on this second page. That has the squares.
Right.
Because at the sheriff's office, we like squares and circles. What other questions do you guys have? So this has already gone into effect as of, again, January 1st. We have had several people already sentenced to this program. Okay? Our first person that looks like they're going to be eligible sometime in the first week of March to be actually placed on base. This will go into effect the same for females. For the female inmates, the female inmates are not actually housed in the jail, they're housed at ICCS. However, we have to have parity. And then the last thing with this, with the electronic home detention, this ability for us to manage their behavior inside the jail and then also provide supervision while they're out in the community is ultimately going to make them the most successful so they don't return. As opposed to, the other option for us, again, if we didn't have a mechanism like this, and we have to start releasing people at that whole 50% concept, we're just going to release them and then they're just going to be out on the street. So we'd much rather do this and have supervision on them and have them successfully transition back into society with us supervising them along with probation versus just pushing them to the street. Yes, sir.
Can one get this alternative sentencing program more than once, even if they violate this?
Not on the same. They can come back if they get arrested again and they go through the criminal process. But if they come back, same thing for us for work release. If an inmate violates work release, they're done.
On that case.
On that
Yeah,
case.
so like I guess in the future case, right?
Oh yeah, they can come back.
All right, so, and what mechanism do we, I mean, I guess, how would we see it on our end that they violated on the first case? Like, we're gonna argue sentencing on the second case, how do we know they violated on the first case?
I don't know how you see that. So for us, specifically as it relates to work release, our alternative sentencing program, if they're sentenced by the judge, we have the option to send a letter of concern to the judge relative to their placement in the program into work release. But if the judge still wants them in work release, they go. Okay?
I think,
If for electronic home detention, you ask a good question. Obviously, if they're a risk for us and they violated it in the past, they're most probably not going to be eligible to go on electronic home detention in the future for us. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to be eligible to be placed in work release.
So, okay, and I guess, I think that makes sense. I guess my question is that it isn't like a revocation, right? So so we're at sentencing on case number 2, or case number 5, or case number 10.
Yep.
Will we have any idea that they've been revoked or have been returned to an actual jail on their previous however many cases when we're arguing sentencing as to why an alternative sentence in this specific case for the 10th time around is not appropriate?
Yeah, I don't know how that works for.
I guess the question is, when you revoke somebody from work release, or you pull them, or you either put them back in general population into the jail because they messed up on work release, or they mess up on this new program, do you give any notice to the courts?
We send a letter back to the sentencing judge.
So that should be in the minute orders. That letter, that notice, you should be able to see on the court side. So, but you'd have to research it, right? So if there is that, I think that notice is really important for us, but.
And so we do that. Any time that a person is reincarcerated as a function of them failing the program for whatever reason, even in work release, we send a notification back to the judge.
Nice if probation included that in their PSIs, that the person was violated previously for messing up a work release.
Well, I can, I have to do the same presentation to Leslie and her people, so I'll mention that to them.
That would be very helpful for
Yeah.
us to not have to research it independently.
Yeah, because ultimately,
No,
again,
no,
it's about working collaboratively. You know, as much as we can, we want to create a system that doesn't create problems for public safety. So to your original question though, somebody that violated, that had been on electronic home detention previously, you know, I'm going to say almost 100% that they're not going to go out to electronic home detention in the future. You know, obviously it's a function of time between offenses, those types of things, right? Any other questions?
Rob, they get some credit for good time, successful completion of an educational program or behavioral health unit. Can you touch on what kind of programs you have, what that would apply to?
Yes, and so essentially we have our education component where if they're actually going through and trying to get a GED, they would be eligible to receive that .33 number. With our behavioral health unit, we have 2 units, 1 male, 1 female unit, and the inmate is placed in that unit, and then casework is developed to kind of assess what their specific needs are. And based off of their needs, we develop a program for them which they have to follow. And so if they're participating in that program, at the end of every month, they actually get good time credit. And so it's more recognition therapy, drug education, social skills building. We also have how to find a job class. Those are the types of classes that we're actually providing in the behavioral health unit. Ultimately, as you know, everybody's aware, 95% of the people in the jail at some point are coming back in the community, and so we want to have a couple of avenues for them to be able to be more successful when they actually go back in the community. So, any
How close are you to capacity that you'll have to start releasing?
every day. This morning we were 6 below.
And who gets released first, like newbies or?
Well, it's just who's ever at the 99% deal, obviously taking into consideration VRAs. And so, for example, we've done a lot of dry runs. A lot of these individuals, they get released a day early, for right now. Fortunately or unfortunately, for us, our booking numbers so far this year, we have, and it's only the 16th today, right? We have booked 200 people less so far this year as compared to last year. And so that's also keeping the count lower, and so I hope that actually continues.
What are the relative numbers of the sentenced inmates versus pretrial?
And so our pretrial population is the larger number. We have about 54 to 56% of our inmate population is pretrial. And then the rest are, we have a small number of convicted that have not been sentenced. It's maybe like 50 or 60 inmates or so. And then the other large component of our population is the sentenced population. which makes up about 46% of the overall population.
Do you have any backlog with respect to transport to DOC or
No.
community corrections?
No. Well, DOC, no. There was a court case well before my time with a previous sheriff and the Department of Corrections. And so the Department of Corrections has to pick up all of our inmates within 24 hours of sentencing. And so we don't have a backlog. Community corrections, and this is a weird deal, and this kind of comes up a lot, actually even for our work release inmates, is that, well, an inmate will go through sentencing and get sentenced to community corrections or get sentenced to work release, and they can't go because they have other charges in Denver or other charges in Arapahoe. And that list, I actually have about 40 of those people right now today. So if I could get those people to go to those other counties and get their stuff resolved and then come on back, I could actually not release 40 other people in the future to the street, which would be, and so I'm trying to work that process. So, yes, sir.
Sorry, last one from me. Sarah, do you guys keep statistics on, out of that 40% that are in the jail post-sentencing or serving sentences, how many of those are either misdemeanor sentences, felony sentences, or I guess more specifically sentences that are people in custody based on probation revocation? No.
You asked a lot of questions there.
Sorry. I asked bad questions, that's what I do, it's terrible questions. I guess you break those statistics down as far as when you say they're post-sentencing for 40%, do you know who those people are and why they're there?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't state them off the top of my head though. What I can tell you, last year we booked in 25,174 people. 67% of all the people that came through the jail were arrested for misdemeanor offenses. So now with that being said, about 65% of all the inmates that we have in jail are there for felonies. And so the inverse of that, 35% are there for misdemeanor offenses that are actually housed. Okay, because 25,000 inmates, we're constantly, we book in 80, anywhere between 60 on a low day, all the way up to just shy of 100 on a high day, and then we're releasing that same number out the door. Because our count generally stays pretty much the same.
Thank you.
Rob, can you touch on the impact of municipal sentences and what you're doing with municipal folks?
Yeah, and so, well, the same rules apply for municipals. And so we've actually been working with them a lot with the municipal judges to try to manage down their pretrial count. They've actually done a really good job, which I really appreciate, because they were allowed 50 beds in pretrial status, and we've been able to actually manage that down. With the PR bond situation, those individuals are funneling out the door faster. With sentencing, work release, with sentencing for the municipal individuals, they get the same good time credits as everybody else. And so they get scheduled for alternative sentencing program. They'll go out on work release for the first part, and then on a bracelet. So it's the exact same. Okay?
Are they on an equal footing with respect to the early release? There's no distinction made whether they're being sentenced on a county case or?
Yeah, because we don't have a whole lot of those individuals that would be sentenced to, unless they're in work release. Other questions?
What you've always wanted to know about the jail, but we're afraid to ask.
Yeah, anything else about the jail? If you want to come by the 7th floor, it's really like spooky now because it's dark. There's nobody up there. There's all sorts of echoes going on. The building kind of actually moves with it too. Like you never realize that until all of a sudden it's empty. Any other questions?
Right, thank you.
All
Thanks,
so
Rob.
much for coming.
Thanks, everybody. One last thing, I did actually include Lieutenant Dan Aiden, he's at a training this week. In the corner on the second, third page is his phone number. So if you have any specific questions, you can contact him and his email. Okay?